We start in Brussels, where EU leaders have been discussing how best to talk US President Donald Trump out of slapping steep tariffs on European goods. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said the EU had received the United States' latest proposal for a trade deal. She said all options were on the table to negotiate an agreement. The EU is facing a deadline of July the 9th, just under 2 weeks, to make a deal with the US, or the bloc could see its goods face 50% levies.
When it came to Donald Trump's new trade proposal, Friedrich Merz once again seemed impatient with his colleagues in the European Union.
On the topic of America, I didn't criticise that. I only suggested, and I have pushed for this, that we don't make it too complicated. We have less than 2 weeks until July the 9th. That's why a quick and simple trade deal is preferable to a slow and complicated one. We must now reach a quick result. We all agree on that. There's no dissent.
The German Chancellor said industries like cars, chemicals, steel and aluminium were already burdened by high tariffs and that businesses were in danger as long as no trade deal was struck. And he has an ally in Emmanuel Macron. The French president said Paris was also in favour of a quick agreement and doesn't want things to drag on forever. Merz also backed the proposal of his compatriot, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, to build a new trade body that would eventually replace the World Trade Organization, which has struggled for relevance in recent years.
We all know the WTO doesn't work anymore.
Merz said the idea of the new body was in its early stages, but that it could become what the WTO was supposed to be. As with the US trade deal, the German Chancellor seems anxious for progress.
Straight to Brussels now, where we can speak to our correspondent Jack Parrock. Jack, hi. We just heard Friedrich Merz, the German Chancellor, speak. It was his first EU summit. What do you make of what he said?
Well, it's clear he's putting a lot of pressure on the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. EU trade deals are known to be complex, sprawling deals with many different clauses. But the Germans and indeed many other countries are now saying that the European Union must do this quickly, essentially playing Donald Trump's game. And that's what they've just learned from the NATO summit that took place earlier this week in The Hague, where they agreed to a 5% increase of GDP to 5% of GDP for the defence spending for all the NATO countries. He likes quick and clear numbers, and that's what Friedrich Merz is saying. We know that the UK and Canada got trade deals and avoided these massive tariffs with the United States, and Merz himself said we simply don't know what's in those deals, but he put it to von der Leyen that she must come up with something as soon as possible. She, after the meetings ended, said we are seized of this. We're going to do everything we can to get a deal.
OK, and while we're talking about trade, Merz said he also supports having an alternative to the World Trade Organization. What's all that about?
Yeah, this was a really interesting thing that is really very, very fledgling coming out of this summit. Just a bit about the sort of choreography. Merz does his press conference on the second floor just behind me, and Ursula von der Leyen does hers down on the ground floor just down here, and we ran from one to the other. Merz has said, I'm going to tell you what von der Leyen is saying, and that's that she's going to announce a potential replacement to the WTO for a certain set of countries, where countries that have trade deals with each other, that have disputes about those trade deals, can go, because the World Trade Organization universally agreed is just not functioning when disputes happen between countries. But for the European Union to put forward the idea of some sort of international body to replace the WTO is very, very strident, and looks like it's moving its priorities away from supporting the reforms there, which is a big, big shift. Von der Leyen, we heard afterwards, she got asked about it and said, yeah, actually, we are looking into this and I did put this forward. So there will be a lot of questions about how the EU wants to move forward on this.
Yeah, definitely a big deal there, Jack. Now, let's move on to Russia's war in Ukraine. This is another big topic at the summit, but it seems like Viktor Orban of Hungary is blocking European unity on that. Is there anything that the other leaders can do to pressure him?
Yeah, well, they want him to sign up to the 18th package of sanctions against Russia. But even as we say, by their nature, 18 rounds means that a lot of the leaders are sort of really losing steam with putting these sanctions on the Russians. And the biggest of them are the Hungarians and the Slovakians, who have to import a lot of Russian energy. Big discussions about the caps. In the end, it looks like there wasn't too much tension, a bit of a can kick down the road. They'll return to this subject in the coming days and weeks.
Right. Now, Jack, when it comes to Israel and the war in Gaza, European leaders are also struggling to speak with one voice. Stay with us. We're going to hear from Pedro Sanchez, the Spanish Prime Minister, then we'll come back to you.
If I may, to be brief, focus on one issue, which is the report presented to the Ministers of Foreign Affairs by the Human Rights Rapporteur on the catastrophic situation of genocide taking place in Gaza. Therefore, what I will defend today in the European Council is that Europe must suspend the association agreement with Israel.
Jack, some pretty strong words from Pedro Sanchez there. What, if anything, have others, like Germany's Friedrich Merz, had to say about what he said?
Yeah, surprisingly, Friedrich Merz didn't give us enough time to ask questions, actually, about that specific aspect of Israel. He kind of brushed over it in his initial comments. And there's a lot of pressure on Germany from countries like Spain, Ireland and Belgium, who are very concerned about the situation in Gaza. Important to say, Pedro Sanchez claims that there's a genocide in Gaza, and the International Court of Justice is looking into the legality of that claim that has been made by a number of countries and NGOs, etc., around the world. But what Pedro Sanchez is saying is that if we're continuing to put pressure and potentially further sanctions on Russia for its war in Ukraine, we must do the same thing for Israel related to the situation in Gaza. And there is a big frustration among certain countries in the European Union that other countries are just not moving so far forward on that. They want to suspend the association agreement with Israel, which basically underpins trade, how they do their diplomacy, how they work together in the world with Israel, over what they see as a direct breach of the human rights, which a report that the EU itself put out and did the study on claims has taken place. It's an EU report, it's not the claim from one of those countries. So the divisions on that have been really clear throughout this summit as well, Jared.
Really interesting analysis there from Jack Parrock, our correspondent in Brussels. Jack, thank you.